As sports history fans, we often reminisce about the legends. Willis Reed limping onto the NBA Finals court, Curt Schilling's bloody sock, Kerry Strug's courageous dismount, and so many more. These moments often define sports history. But what about the countless injuries that did not become legends, or careers that were derailed due to inadequate care? That's where this episode's sponsor comes in. Introducing to you, ILP Sports Consultants, your trusted sports injury partner, available 24/7. Brian Maelli at ILP Sports Consultants has over 20 years of experience in the orthopedic and sports medicine industry, and he has worked with athletes across the gamut, from youth to amateurs, professionals, in almost every sport played in the United States of America, accommodating athletes at every stage of their career. This adaptability ensures that ILP services are perfectly tailored to your skill level, no matter where you are in your athletic journey. With ILP, you are in control. Choose the steps that matter most to you. Diagnosis, treatment plan, recovery, or the whole journey. ILP services are tailored to your unique needs. Rushing for care is a common pitfall, leading to future problems. ILP Sports Consultants helps you make the right decisions, ensuring that you receive timely and safe care. And here's a bonus. Brian hosts the Injured List podcast, sharing insights and athlete stories you won't want to miss. Whether you're a concerned parent or grandparent, or an athlete yourself seeking guidance, ILP Sports Consultants is your beacon of hope in sports injury management. Visit ilpsports.com today. That's the letters ilpsports.com. ILP Sports Consultants, where your well-being is the priority and your recovery is the mission. Choose ILP Sports Consultants for a healthier sports journey, helping you get back in the game the smart way.
This is Craig Colquitt, former punter for the University of Tennessee Volunteers and the Pittsburgh Steelers, and you are listening to Total Sports Recall Podcast, a part of Sports History Network. Now, here is your host, Harv Aronson.
Welcome to the Total Sports Recall Podcast and another special interview. The fight song you heard at the start of the show is that of my alma mater, North Hills High School. Today's guest hails from not just from the same hometown as yours truly, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but he's also a North Hills High School graduate. My guest is Steve Fedell, born and raised in the Westview section of North Hills in Pittsburgh. Steve is the son of Charles and Betty Fedell and one of 7 children who all happen to be boys. Steve attended St. Athanasius, I might have mispronounced that name, but he'll correct me afterwards, elementary school before going to North Hills High School, where he graduated in 1976. As a linebacker for the Indians of North Hills, Steve was the recipient of several athletic honors in his 4 years at the high school, specifically Most Valuable Player, All-State for Pennsylvania, All-Western Pennsylvania Interscholastic League team, and was an all-area team selection. Steve earned a full athletic scholarship to the University of Pittsburgh, where he majored in economics. At Pitt, Steve led all 4 years he played for the Panthers and became a starter in his freshman season. Steve played in his 4 major bowl games, the Gator Bowl, Citrus Bowl, Fiesta Bowl, and in his final season, the Gator Bowl again. While at Pitt, Steve's teams finished 11-1 twice in his junior and senior seasons, and in 1980, the University of Pittsburgh was selected by the New York Times as the #1 team in the country. After leaving the University of Pittsburgh, Steve signed on with the Pittsburgh Steelers as a free agent and played 2 seasons before an Achilles tendon injury ended his career. On a personal note, Steve's the proud father of 2 children, Austin and Colton, who, like their father, are residing in Westview in Pittsburgh. Steve, as a fellow classmate, I'd like to welcome you to the Total Sports Recall Podcast. It's an honor to have a fellow graduate on the show, and one that not just played major college football, but that also made it to the Pittsburgh Steelers roster.
Thanks, Harv. I appreciate you having me on, and always great to talk to one of the North Hills alumni.
Absolutely. I've always been proud of where I came from and the schools I attended. And, I followed your career closely. You made the school proud, no doubt about that. I've always wanted to have you on the show, and here we are. So let's start our conversation by going back to your high school days. I clearly remember going out on Friday nights to Martinelli Stadium, watching you and the team play home games, and us fans carrying on that tradition of holding up four fingers at the start of the fourth quarter and chanting four. I believe Gus Nauman was your head coach then, but correct me if I'm wrong. And then tell our listeners what you remember most about being one of the most standout players during your time at North Hills.
Yeah, well, Gus, he was a coach up until my sophomore year, and then Earl Check came in as the head coach my junior and senior year. But, the thing I remember about the high school football was the fact that we played under the lights on Friday night. The fans were fantastic always. The stadium always had a full crowd, which is awesome to see from the community. And, hey, I had a bunch of great teammates as well, and as everyone knows, football's a team sport. One guy can't do it by himself. And so, fortunately, we had a lot of great players on the team. And, we certainly had our share of success over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. Your first year at Pitt was 1977. The Panthers finished 9-2-1, 8th in the country, defeated Clemson in the Gator Bowl, 34-3. And then in 1980, your last year at Pitt, you closed out your college career as a starting linebacker, and the Panthers soundly defeated South Carolina in the Gator Bowl, 37-9. As a senior, looking back at your college career and reflecting now, what stands out most for you considering your days as a linebacker at Pitt?
Well, again, I go back to my teammates. We had some of the best players, I think, in the entire country playing at Pitt at that time. Marino was a quarterback, Hugh Green, Ricky Jackson, Bill Neal, Jerry Boyarsky, Mark May, Russ Grimm, Jimbo Covert. We had terrific players. And, it was a shame to see what happened to Pitt after Jackie Sherrill left because he had built such a great program. The recruiting and so forth was just really phenomenal. And when he left, new administration took over at Pitt, and things just didn't go so well. And, quite frankly, they've struggled ever since, to get back to that relevancy. I know 2 years ago when Pickett was a senior, which I think was either his fifth or sixth year, which is really amazing to me today. You look at some of these players that are playing in college, they could become a doctor by the time they're done. They're in there for 7, 8, 9 years now. Mm-hmm. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Where we went in 4 years, you were done.
Uh-huh.
Unless you were hurt. But, we again, going back to the teams, we just had some terrific players. And, we had a great coach in Jackie Sherrill who, we still talk to this day. He comes up and we get together for different events and so forth. And, it was a pretty awesome atmosphere.
That's great. Yeah, and some of those names you mentioned was going to be the next thing I was going to ask you is because while you were at Pitt, you played alongside some of those big names that were your teammates. A lot of them went to the NFL. The first one that comes to mind, though, is obviously Dan Marino, who also hails from our home city, a Central Catholic high school product. But you got to share a locker room with guys like you already mentioned, Hugh Green, Jeff Pelusi, Jerry Boyarsky, JoJo Heath, Ricky Jackson, and, of course, Marino. And Pitt sent many of these players to the pros. But for you, what was it like to play with some of those guys that made a major impact in the NFL?
Yeah, again, like we always said, we all put our pants on the same way, so we all got along great as teammates and we played for each other. And, it was a shame the 2 years, my junior and senior year, we lost to North Carolina. I think it was the second game of the season. And then we lost to Florida State my senior year in the middle of the season. And, like we said today, if they would have had the college playoffs, I guarantee we'd have had several more national championships because,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
you lose one game, you were out back then. It took a miracle to end up, winning the
Exactly.
national championship. But
Yeah.
today, you lose one or two games to get in a playoff, you can still mold your own destiny there. So,
Yeah, I'm a strong believer in that playoff system because, I mean, even back in your day, you had to rely on somebody's vote, sports writer's vote,
yeah,
to be named
that's
national
exactly
champion.
right.
And I don't even think they include enough teams in the playoffs these days. I think we're up to 4 or 8 now. Is it? I can't remember if they've
Yeah, I
added the
think it's
extra 4.
4 right now.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, I think it's 8 right now, but they're supposed to expand it to 24, I think, in the next year or 2 years.
Yeah. I mean, you run basketball with 64 teams. Why not have more football teams playing
Yeah,
our championship? It doesn't make
absolutely.
any sense. Yeah. So you mentioned Jackie Sherrill, and he's a legendary coach, no doubt about it. What was that experience like? Can you expand a little more on that?
Well, I mean, he was a no BS coach, but he always had his players' best interest at heart, and he was a terrific recruiter. When he was there with Johnny Majors, he was the one that was instrumental in bringing Tony Dorsett to Pitt. He camped out over at Hopewell High School, and the rest is history. But Jackie was a terrific recruiter. He knew talent. He recruited a bunch of undersized kids, but he was able to project where they could be, how much weight, strength, and different things that they could put on over time. And you know, he had a terrific run. I think from a winning percentage, I think he's the winningest coach of all time over at Pitt.
Wow.
But he was truly an amazing coach, and still an amazing guy to this day. I mean, he is really a great guy, and thrilled that I played for him.
Yeah. How many years has he been retired now?
Last coaching was at Mississippi State,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to say that was probably 15 years ago now, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Johnny Majors because recently on my show here I had Craig Colquitt on, and he played for Johnny Majors at Tennessee, and sent me a photo
Yeah.
of him and Johnny Majors. So back in your days of Pitt, I remember it very well when I was watching football back then. Pitt and Penn State used to have a fierce rivalry. Do you recall playing in any of those games?
Oh, sure.
Any standouts for
I'm
you?
still sore from some of those games.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, they were the hardest hitting games.
Uh-huh.
In a regular game, it probably took you 2 or 3 days to get over the soreness. When we
Wow.
played Penn State, it took us over 7 days to get over the soreness. We hit
Oh
so
my
hard.
goodness. That's
I mean,
crazy.
it
I
was
mean, that
just,
used to be
it
such a
was
great
just,
rivalry.
it was tremendous
Uh-huh.
rivalry. And it was always, we used to always play them like the day after Thanksgiving,
Hmm.
and it was always a tremendous game between the two teams. But it's a shame what's happened with college football and
Hmm.
all these conferences, and you got teams
Yeah,
like West Virginia. They got to fly out to the West Coast to play their
sure.
opponents, and I just think it does a big disservice to the fans. Instead of having all these teams playing local, where the fan could get in the car and drive somewhere. Now they're flying
Hmm.
all over the country, and I just think it's a travesty.
Oh yeah, I think it's ridiculous the way they've broken up these conferences, like teams that were in the Big Ten moving out of the Big Ten. It makes no sense. They want to go
No,
play for another conference, all because of money. Really, it's what it's all. That's
yeah,
what it's all about. And it's a
yep.
shame because Pitt and Penn State was such a great rivalry. And,
Ah,
I mean, I know Pitt still plays West Virginia, the backyard brawl, they call it.
yeah,
You played in those games, right, against West Virginia? That's another
yeah.
rivalry.
West Virginia wasn't very good when I played.
Yeah.
We used to slaughter them every year.
Yeah.
They were
Well,
not very good. I
uh,
remember the first game we played when I was a freshman. Jackie
uh-huh.
Sherrill, we were in the locker room, and he said to us, we were about ready to go out and take the field. He said, "Do not take your helmets off." We said, "Wow, what's the problem?" He goes, "They are going to bombard us with stuff."
Oh, no
They
way.
threw so much stuff at us on the field. They had to delay the game a half hour so they could clean the field up. They were throwing
Really?
cans, whatever they get their hands on, bottles.
Oh my gosh.
And it was at that old stadium they had down there, so the fans were
Uh-huh.
right on top of you.
Yeah.
But thank God I think we beat them that day 44-3. So we
Wow.
cleared their stadium out around halftime. They figured they better go downtown and start drinking. That was a better option for them.
Yeah, they've got quite a reputation there, University of West Virginia, as a party school.
Oh,
I mean, when I was back in our day, it was a really bad
yeah.
reputation. I mean, that was one of the worst schools. And I'll tell you, we went to Pittsburgh recently, my wife and I. We drove up through West Virginia, and that is like one of the worst drives
Yeah.
to go through. It's
Yeah.
it's a big state, but so some of our listeners may not be from Pittsburgh, so they may not recognize your name. But anyone listening that's a North Hills High graduate like ourselves, and from the mid '70s, will know you. And your opponents that might be listening, they might remember your name for sure. With that said, your name will live on in one area, and for that, I congratulate you, Steve. Even though this happened in 1999, you were inducted into the North Hills High School Hall of Fame. That must have been a huge announcement for you.
Oh, it was great. I mean, I was very humbled by the honor and the fact that the high school recognized me. There's not a whole heck of a lot more I can say about it, but it was a great honor, and I very much appreciated it.
Well, you definitely earned it. And being in that Hall of Fame puts you in some rather good company. I mean, LeVar Arrington, who played linebacker like yourself and had a really good career with the Redskins, also graduated from North Hills High School, and he's in the Hall. Tom Dornbrook played for the Steelers, offensive line for several seasons. Zena Herman's an amazing swimmer. I also knew her. She was inducted in 2000. Then there's football coach Gus Nauman, and Major League Baseball playing Chip Lang, and Buffalo's excellent defensive back, Mark Kelso. That's some pretty great company you're a part of.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, hey, there's a lot of great players and athletes that came out of North Hills. As you know, Harv, back in the day, our graduating class was 850 students.
Mm-hmm.
So we had some big classes, and I'm sure you
Yeah.
guys were 800 or so.
We were like 836 or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So we had some big classes. So naturally, you're going to come across some athletes that in that size congregation of people, and so I'm not surprised of how many great athletes that we had to come out of the school. But yeah, those guys and gals were all great athletes, and again, I'm very honored to be part of the High School Hall of Fame.
Yeah, well, I'm a little guy, so everybody always asks me. I'm not too bad athletically, but back in high school, everybody have said to me over the years, is how come you didn't try for any sports? I'm like, are you kidding me? I said, we have so many great athletes at that school. I didn't stand a chance. I think I tried out for baseball in ninth grade, and it was not even close. I mean, there was too many other great players. So, our high school's always had a reputation to have some really good athletes. But one name I like to mention is also in the Hall of Fame is Ed Krankovic, and he was put in posthumously. I don't know if you knew Ed or his story, but those who were students in North Hills at the time can never forget what happened. Well, he was with two other friends, just so we can remind listeners who we're talking about. He was on vacation with two friends, and he drowned in a hotel swimming pool, and he's in the Hall because of his basketball skills. One of the best players in the histories of Indiana basketball. And to this day, he might be one of the saddest days in the school's history. It sounds like you knew Ed and you knew his story.
Yeah, I mean, Eddie was several years younger than me, but I did know of him. He actually went to the same grade school that I went to, St. Athanasius.
Oh, no kidding.
Wow. And by the way, that's how you say it, Harv. Athanasius.
Yeah, I knew I messed it up at the beginning. That's a tough one.
That's okay. But yeah, I knew Eddie, a great young guy. I knew his older brother, Tony, who also had played basketball as well at both St. Athanasius and also at North Hills. But that was a very, very tragic situation. In fact, when I learned what had happened, it was devastating. I couldn't believe that that situation happened. I mean, it was just a real shocker to me.
Yeah,
And I felt
and I was
terrible
still
for his family.
absolutely. I mean, it was really a dark day at North Hills at the school. I mean, it was very, very sad. He was such a nice
Yes.
guy. Everybody really liked the guy, and he was really a really good basketball player. So it really was a
Yep.
shame.
Yes, he was.
So growing up in North Hills, one of my neighbors was also an outstanding North Hills athlete. Actually, I'm surprised he wasn't in the Hall of Fame, but you can see if you know this guy, Mike Rubino. He was a WPIAL champion wrestler at 155 pounds. I think he graduated in 74 or 75. Did you know Mike?
I know the name. I didn't really know him personally. But yeah, I do recall the name.
Yeah, he was a really good wrestler, lived just up a couple of houses away from me. And his father was an outstanding wrestler at Penn State. Mike followed up and went to Pitt, actually. But he didn't last because he had an injury, I think, and couldn't make the team after that. But yeah, so I always thought that he might be in there because he did win the WPAL championship at his weight. Well, let's get to the final chapter of your career, Steve. You were on the Pittsburgh Steelers, and obviously, being from Pittsburgh, I always say anybody that's from Pittsburgh is not a Steelers fan. There's something wrong with them. Once you're a Steelers fan, you're always a Steelers fan. I know your injury cut your career short, so tell us about that.
Well, I mean, I was sort of shocked that I wasn't drafted because several teams had said, "Hey, we're gonna, pick you in such and such round, blah blah blah." But in any event, the draft went by, free agency opened up, and so a bunch of teams were interested, and I said, "Hey, if I'm going to do this thing, I may as well do it in Pittsburgh." Rather than go out to San Francisco or Philadelphia or one of these other teams. I said, hey, I had a lot of confidence in my abilities. And so I signed with them. And, the first year, whenever I was playing, I had a partial tear to my left Achilles. So they put me on injury reserve. I went into a cast for, 14 or 16 weeks and got the thing to heal up. And then I practiced for a couple weeks after that through the end of the year and went back the next year. And in training camp, I totally severed the tendon in training camp, the same tendon. And so after I had it repaired, we met with the doctor and Chuck Knoll, and the doctor said, Steve, that tendon's never going to hold up. We put it together best we could, but it was in pretty bad shape. And he said, the position that you play, because you push off on it, and so he said, it's just not going to hold up. So Chuck Knoll said, hey, what do you want to do? It's up to you. If you want to try to come back, we're more than glad to have you. I said, you know what? Wow. I'm ready for business. And so, I went into the business world and, fortunately everything worked out great over there. And, but it was good. I mean, the Steelers were very good to me. And I actually helped them do some scouting after I got hurt with Art Rooney Jr. I would fly around to different schools, and meet with some of the players that, were high on their draft list. And, I went to the Senior Bowl with those guys and, met with a bunch of the players and different things. And Art actually wanted me to stay with the team in the scouting department. I said, you know what? I always made the commitment to myself that once I was done playing, I was going in a totally different direction, and
sure.
I still get together with him from time to time, and he says, you would have been a general manager, but I said, hey, it's nice of you to say that. But who the heck knows?
Yeah. Well, you kind of answered what was going to be my next question, but a lot of players don't get the opportunity to stay where they're from. So I was going to ask you what it meant to you to make your hometown team.
Yeah, I mean, it was, it's always a dream. Hey, if you can you go from North Hills to Pitt. A lot of people said, "Hey, why'd you choose Pitt?" I mean, my two choices, it came down between Pitt and or Pitt in Michigan.
Oh.
And I remember I had to call Bo Schembechler at the hospital. He had just had a heart attack. He was in the hospital recovering.
Oh.
But I had promised that I would let him know as soon as I had a decision. Because back then the recruiting was so much different than what it is today. And,
Sure.
they would be camping out at your door. They would try to invite themselves to dinner, and everything else. So it was a mess. But anyhow, I had to call him at the hospital and tell him, that I was going to Pitt. And he was very gracious about it. He goes, "Hey, I wish you nothing but the best. And if things don't work out or whatever, you can always call." But,
Sure.
People ask me why I went to Pitt. And I said, hey, at the time, Pitt was one of the top teams in the country. I mean, very high-profile team. And I said, and the other thing is I have 6 brothers, and they all wanted to watch me play. And it was a lot easier doing it in Pittsburgh than it was having those guys drive 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours to watch me play. I had all my support infrastructure here, and so it was great. I mean, I just wish I would have stayed healthy. The unfortunate thing is I really never had any severe injuries in college at all. And then I get to the pros, and bump, I have that Achilles issue. And the doctor was right, because 20 years after he operated on that, I played touch football for about 3 minutes, and I tore the same Achilles again.
No way. Are you serious? Wow.
Yes, sir. And I said, yeah, a group of guys, they said to me, "Hey, let's play touch football." We were at my oldest son's at a baseball picnic. I said, "No, really, I'm going to pitch horseshoes and drink beer." And so they convinced me, and like 3 minutes into it, boom, I'm down on my back.
Oh, no.
One of the guys said, "Oh, I think he twisted his ankle." I said, "No, it didn't." I said, "My Achilles is shot."
Wow.
I was operated on the very next day. And then 2 years
gosh.
ago, I did my right one.
Are you serious? Wow.
Yeah, so unbelievable. What a mess.
So how's your body holding up these days after all the football?
Yeah, I mean, I have my share of bumps and bruises, Harv, but for the most part, I really can't complain. I can basically do whatever I want to do, which I think is a bonus, because I see some of the guys that played, and they're in pretty bad shape.
Yeah. One of the names that comes to mind is Jim Otto, who played long before you, but that poor guy was in such awful shape after his football career was over.
He could barely get out of bed in the morning.
I think he's had knees replaced, hips replaced. I mean, what a mess. One thing I just thought of before was the fact of you still knowing Dan Marino and everything. And if you talk to Steeler fans, they always curse the Rooneys and Chuck Noll for not drafting Dan Marino. They would have loved to kept him in Pittsburgh. And everybody says if he had come to the Steelers as the quarterback, we'd have many more Super Bowls than we have now. Have you ever talked to him about that? Not playing for the Steelers, not getting drafted?
I don't talk to him about that. I mean, Dan and I have a great relationship. And I'll tell you a funny story, is that when he was coming out of Pitt in '83, that was the time that I was helping the Steelers doing some scouting. And they had asked me about all the rumors about him, and I said, they're all a bunch of BS. I said, people are trying to say he's taking this and doing that. I said, it's ridiculous.
I remember that.
But in any event, if you'll recall, they drafted Gabe Rivera that year. He was a defensive tackle out of Texas Tech.
Yep, he's a tragic story.
But they had debated for a good portion of I don't know if they had 15 or 20 minutes for their first round selection between Rivera and Marino.
Wow.
Which one they were going to take. Only reason why they didn't take Marino is they thought they had Bradshaw for another 3 to 4 years. And then, if you'll recall, he hurt his elbow that year, and that was it for him.
Yep.
If they would have known that in the draft, they would have definitely taken Marino.
Wow.
But
well,
they really thought they
they
really thought they had Bradshaw for another 3 or 4 years.
Well, if you talk to Steeler fans, the story I've heard is that Chuck Noll did not want to draft him, but the Rooneys did. And that was where the debate was. So I don't know if there's any truth to that, but that's what I've heard.
Yeah. Like I said, I know they debated it. I don't know who wanted who or didn't or whatever. But as I said, the big thing was they thought they had Bradshaw for another 3 or 4 years, that they didn't have to address the quarterback situation, that they needed a lineman, in a much more critical way than what they needed a quarterback. So.
Right. And for those who don't know the Gabe Rivera story, he's another tragic story with him, because he was in the car accident that paralyzed him. I believe it was from either the waist down or neck down, but and then I understand that he just passed away a few years ago as well.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, and his accident was over on Babcock Boulevard.
Yeah, I remember that very clearly. What a shame. It really was.
No, because he was a great player, and he would have done extremely well playing with the Steelers. But like you said, it was just that accident was just terrible.
I think it was in his rookie season, wasn't it? He was a rookie or second year. Yeah,
it was in his rookie year. Yeah.
So he really never got the chance to play. Well, of all the players you met while you were wearing the black and gold, who do you remember the most, and who did you become the closest friends with?
Well, I'm friends with a lot of the guys that played, because, we all belong to the NFLPA, and so we get together a couple times a year. We play in different golf outings together and so forth. But, I see guys like Mel Blount. Of course, when Franco was around, Franco was a terrific human being. Craig Wolfley, Craig Bingham. There's a lot of guys that, we get together and, have a good time and talk about the old days and so forth. But, in terms of actually hanging out and so forth, I don't really hang out with a whole lot of people other than my family.
Sure. Well, nothing wrong with that.
Because there's only so many hours in a day, Harv, and when I was working, I went hard every day for 11, 12 hours a day, so
sure.
You got to prioritize. Where do you spend your time? What do you do? And the other thing is, I live a life where I don't really share a lot in the public. I like to keep things personalized and internalized, so.
Well, for you saying that, I appreciate you coming on the show, even, because I've been wanting to interview you for years, so I'm very happy to have you on. And
hey, for a North Hills guy, we've got to stick together, Harv.
I hear you. Definitely, I appreciate that. Well, obviously, you still follow football today. Before we came on the show, you told me you're going to be watching football with your family today, and so obviously you must be a Steelers fan. What are your impressions of football in general in 2023, and your opinion? How do we get the Steelers back to the Super Bowl?
Well, football in general, I'm glad I'm not playing today, because I think that they have absolutely ruined what's going on with the game.
Sure.
Especially on the college level with all this NIL and all the rivalries that have been taken away, as you and I were talking earlier. I just think it's terrible. But I guess they're still making money, so they're going to continue to do what they do. And in terms of the Steelers getting back on track, I don't know if there's anything magical to it. There's probably some things execution-wise. They might be short a player or two, that they need, maybe a new center. I don't know. Yeah. But, as I've always said, if you don't have a good line, offensive line and defensive line, you're not going to win anything.
Sure.
And you look at the top teams that win every year, they have a good offensive line, a good defensive line.
Yeah.
Because you could take a mediocre running back, put him behind a good offensive line, he can become a pretty darn good running back.
Absolutely. I always said that about Emmitt Smith. While he's the all-time leading rusher, to my own contention, I don't think he's the best running back ever. He played behind a massive offensive line.
Could you imagine if you put Barry Sanders behind that offensive line?
Oh, my gosh. Well, for me, he's the best running back ever. He and Walter Payton. I mean, those two, I think, are much better than Emmitt Smith. But so the Kenny Pickett story, I know when he came out, there was all this talk about it. His hands are too small to play in the NFL. And I said, that's the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. You can have too small of hands. The kid, I think, has it. And it's just a matter of time. I think he'll come around.
Yeah, again, it's all – a lot of it is psychological too, Harv. Depending how these kids acclimate themselves to that league, because it can be very intimidating and brutal because of the money involved, where people don't have the patience, the understanding, and so forth. And, as we've all seen, there's been some great players that have gone to the NFL, and they've churned them out, and they haven't done absolutely nothing in the NFL.
Sure. Absolutely.
And I attribute a lot of it to really just the mental aspect of that game. It's hard. When you get there, it's a hard, hard game. And, if you're not mentally fit and up to the challenge, it can be devastating.
Yeah. Well, I constantly say on my show that growing up in the era we did, the 70s and the 80s, those were the two best decades for sports, I think, in my opinion, of any decade. And I would trade football back then for what we have today because it was so much more fun to watch back then. And the rules were less, the penalty flags weren't flying as much, and the hitting was extremely different than what you see today. Because of the rules, it was much harder hitting game. I'm sure you can attest to that just from your own body.
Well, and I'll tell you the other thing is I think a lot of the calls today that take place on the field are subjective, and like I tell people, or express my opinion, I don't know how you bet on a game today because so many calls are subjective. That guy goes down the field, they call pass interference. Next time he goes down, the guy's all over his back. They don't call anything.
Right.
It's just very subjective to calls, and I don't understand it.
Yeah, I'm sure Mel Blount would not appreciate playing in today's game. That's for sure.
No,
he would not be able to do what he was able to do back then today.
Of course, as you know, they changed some of the rules as a result of what he used to do to those wide receivers.
Absolutely. Well, I've reviewed your resume, Steve, your post-football career. It's impressive. You held some extremely high positions with Ricoh Corporation. In 2021, you were on the board of directors for RPM Industries. You've done volunteer work for the Rotary Club of Pittsburgh, served as a board member at the DePaul Institute, as well as being on the board for St. Anthony School and CLO. You still active within these organizations? And can you also provide our listeners with a rundown of what you're involved with these days, any projects you can tell us about, or any other sports activities you might be involved in?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'm really doing right now is I'm still on the board of RPM Industries, which is a company out of Washington, PA. They're in the prelude market for heavy equipment like cranes and backhoes and stuff like that. But the other ones, when I was working, I was on the board of directors for CLO and St. Anthony's and DePaul and the other organizations. But since I retired, I really haven't stayed active with any of those. Because when I retired, Harv, I said to myself, I'm retiring. I don't really want to continue to run at the pace I ran at when I was working. I want to sit back. I want to enjoy my family. The kids are starting to have grandchildren now.
Wow.
So, that's where I really want to spend my time. And,
Hmm.
I help mentor my kids and, do whatever I can to help them out in their careers. And
Hmm.
they're both doing great. I'm really proud of them. But, as I said, when I retired, I said, I want to step back from a lot of this stuff. And I don't want to feel like I have a 9 to 5 job in retirement.
Sure, absolutely. Well, your sons, Austin and Colton, did they happen to follow in your footsteps? Were they athletes? And what about your parents? Were they athletes before you?
No, my mother and dad never participated at all. And coming up in their area in the Depression, it was a different animal, Harv.
Yeah.
And of course they both passed years ago.
Hmm.
But my two sons, the oldest one, Austin, he played at North Allegheny,
Okay.
and then he went to Slippery Rock. He played there on a football scholarship,
All right. My
and he
alma
had an
mater.
awesome career. Yeah, he had
That's
an awesome
excellent.
career over at the Rock. He made All-American over there. He was a
No
guard and a
kidding.
center. Yeah, he
Wow.
started, when he was a freshman, and he played. He was really good. He would have went big time. The only problem with him was he's only 6 foot tall, and
Oh,
that
no.
killed him. Because I tried to
Yeah.
get him in over at Pitt, and Wanstad was coaching. I wanted to say, Steve, problem is, I'm getting these guys 6'4", 6'5". I said, yeah,
Yeah,
but they
yeah.
aren't tough like him. But it
Uh-huh.
worked out great for him at the Rock. He had a great career and great experience. And he works for a company called Workday
Okay.
in sales in the healthcare division. So he's doing great. And then the youngest one, when he was coming up, Austin, he was really tough in high school. And so all of Colton's friends said, "Oh, Colt, you got to play football, blah, blah, blah." Well, I knew he didn't want to play football. But I let him go to the training, before the season
Hmm.
started. No equipment. They were just due to running and all that, to get in
Yeah.
shape. So
Hmm.
they were ready to get their equipment. I could see he was not happy. So I said, "Colt, you really don't want to play football, do you?" He goes, "No, Dad." He said, "But my friends are all crazy about it." I said, "You tell your friends your dad won't let you play."
There
He
you go.
says, "Are you serious?" So he told him. And then all the kids come over to him, "Mr. Fedell, why won't you let Colton play?" I said, that football's stupid. But he's a hell of a golfer, Harv. He's a scratch
Yeah.
golfer. Oh,
Wow.
terrific golfer. Yeah, he started golfing. I got him involved when he was 3 years old.
Do you ever think of going
Terrific
pro?
player. No, he's not that good. Those guys
Yeah.
are amazing. They're at a
Well, it's
different
interesting.
level.
It's interesting you brought that up about Colton because another guy, a neighbor of mine, I'm trying to get on the show, and he's going to come on. His name's Dan Pelzarski, and I don't know if you know the name or not, but he also graduated from North Hills. I think he graduated after me, so it might be 78 or 79. But he wanted to make the PGA. He was an outstanding golfer. I mean, an unbelievable golfer.
Hmm.
Went to Ohio State on a scholarship, tried to make the PGA, and almost made it. He almost got his green card there. But so he ended up on the Canadian Professional Golf Tour and played for years on the
Yeah.
Canadian Tour. So he's going to come back on the show. But he and I actually went to the PGA Championship at Oakmont Country Club, and I believe it was like 1974. And that was the one and only time I've ever been to a professional golf tournament. Steve, I'll tell you, that was one of the most exciting events I've ever seen. I had a
Yeah.
blast. We had so much
You
fun
went in
until we.
74 to it, Harv.
Yeah,
You
I'm
went in
pretty sure it was
1970.
74. 74
Wow.
Oakmont Country Club, and I got to see Johnny Miller play. It came down to a one-hole playoff because on the 18th green, Jerry Pate and Jerry Mahaffey were vying for first place, and one of them had to make a putt to win, and if he didn't, it was a sudden death playoff. And I remember it's a funny story because we got to the 18th green. What Dan suggested was we would follow a set of golfers all the way from first hole to 18th, then backtrack and follow the leaders the rest of the way in, which was a pretty good
Hmm.
strategy. So we got down to watching the final hole, and I got to the 18th green. They have the grandstands, and they were completely filled. and I couldn't see anything because there was no seats. I was like, oh, this is unreal. I said, how am I going to watch this? I climbed up the side of the stands about 18 feet off the ground and peered out. And as soon as the guy missed the putt to send it to sudden death, everybody went running for the first sudden death hole. So I never got to see it finish because just so many people were. It was a lot of fun. So that's interesting. That Colton likes golf. Yeah. So brought up that story. And with Austin, you're going to have to tell him that I'm also a Slippery Rock alumni.
Yes, I definitely will tell them that, Harv.
Yeah, and I still follow their football every year. And in fact, I'll stream their games when they get to the Division II playoffs. This year, I'm sure Austin knows, but this year they're doing extremely well. 6-0, undefeated. They're 6th in the country, and they just blasted Mercyhurst College a week ago. I think it was 75-20. Yeah. So they've got a very good team. So let's make Austin really happy. But that's really cool. That's something I didn't know. So that's really neat that his father went to high school with me, and his son went to the same alma mater as I did. Same school.
Absolutely.
Very cool. Well, I want to thank Steve Fedell for being a guest on Total Sports Recall. I must admit to Steve, for years I wanted to interview him, and I did follow your career, as I stated closely, and as a fellow North Hills High School graduate. I think I can speak for other alumni that as a former Indian athlete, you have made the school very proud, reached some very high goals, and you're always welcome to come back to the show, and I would like to have another show with you if you ever want to. And do you have any parting thoughts for our listeners?
No, Harv, I appreciate it, and always glad to help out a former alumni. And, I appreciate you having me on the show and wish you nothing but the tremendous success. And, hey, hopefully we could do another show down the road, and I'll get some of my former players from Pitt that join me.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. We can definitely do roundtable using this platform, so we can all come into the studio and we can do a roundtable. Yeah. It would be a lot of fun. It'd be very
absolutely
cool. So that's something we'll have to work on. Well, for Total Sports Recall, this is your host, Harv Aronson, and next week there will be yet another episode of the show. Several sports people have been booked for interviews for the show, and announcements for those can be found on my Twitter page using my handle at TSRHarv59. You may also reach me with any comments or suggestions by emailing me at totalsportsrecall@gmail.com. Be sure to visit my YouTube channel, Total Sports Recall, and my website, totalsportsrecall.com. For Steve Fedell, this is Harv Aronson, wishing everyone a great week. In closing, a special treat, Steve Fedell's college alma mater, the University of Pittsburgh Marching Band, playing Hail to Pitt.
The contents of this podcast does not represent the opinions of others and is solely the opinions of Harv Aronson based on his experience, knowledge, and research.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I wanted to thank you for stopping by to listen to another episode here on the Sports History Network. Our podcasters are passionate about uncovering and sharing sports stories from yesteryear. And if you didn't know it already, we have over 30 shows across the network covering all sorts of sports history topics. In fact, here's a glimpse into one of our awesome podcasts here on the network.
Hello, football friends. This is Darren Hayes of the Pigskin Dispatch podcast, and I'd like to invite you to the portal of positive football history, Pigskin Dispatch and pigskindispatch.com. We talk about everything that centers around the game of American football, expert discussions, the origins of the games, the great players, teams, and coaches, and more, and some great guests and insights from experts. We have new episodes 3 to 4 times a week, and you can find us on sportshistorynetwork.com, pigskindispatch.com, or your favorite podcast provider.
How about that? I bet you're super hyped to go listen to that new podcast, right? Well, to learn about this show and all the other podcasts on the network, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/podcasts. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/podcasts. Head over there today to find your next favorite sports history podcast.